There you are. Let's see, are they docile? Are they pacifistic? They're pretty wary of me. I don't think I'm gonna harass them, but let's see if I can push them into the water. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I am the dominant alpha goose. I don't see any gazebos around here except people's houses. I don't see any bodegas, whatever they're called. Where would I find such a thing? Maybe a nice tree. I'm gonna end up walking around this lake, maybe hiding under a bench. I don't know how I'm going to get safety. I mean, it's not that rainy, but it would be nice to have a little bit of shelter. It's kind of cool. It's cooled off, chilly. We've got an egret, I believe, over here. He's got the feather in the back of his head is wobbling around. I probably need a haircut. Reminds me how wobbly my hair's getting. So it's just a chill day in the park, having a good time, eating some Thai food eventually. Once we find a good place to stop. But yeah, nothing too crazy going on today. What's the most important new idea I've had today? Look at this, the lake slowly creeping its way under this little bridge made of concrete. Ideas: the rock, the fish, the spiritual patricide. I think at this point I've covered all the topics that I want to cover in general, and I don't really have any new ideas at the moment. I guess what I could say is I'm going to go to a whiteboard. I'm going to try to visualize the things. I'm also not going to get run over by these bikers. But, go to the whiteboard. And how's it going, guys? Go to the whiteboard and start off with just like some basic concepts. So you start off with like the absolute unity of reality, right? What does that even mean? It's kind of mysterious. You start off with these concepts and not really justifying them or proving them via argumentation, although you can try that later, but just to be like, here are the options of viewing reality. You can view an absolute unity, that everything is an absolute unity, that difference is kind of an illusion. Everything reduced comes from the one and returns to the one. And then you have like the dualism of the opposites, the dialectic, Hegelian. Everything is hot and cold, strong and weak, tall and short, and that defines everything. And that's, I guess, Chris Langan has that idea of syndiphionesis. And so you go back and forth between the two, that everything exists or does not exist. But that's kind of a contradiction. Like, how can there be the one and the duality? Are these opposed ideas? Then you get to the third stage, the Trinitarian, where it's like there is some kind of medium, or there's some kind of connecting force, there's some kind of synthesis and a resolution between the monad and the dyad, and that's found in the triad. And Goose knows what I'm talking about, right? Goose, if you agree, please go in the water. Oh, he's hissing at me. I actually don't like when he's hissing. I think it might be on some eggs right now, I think. That's why it's not hitting up. So anyway, yeah, you can do that. And that's some basic starting point. And then ask, like, who are we? We're human beings. We're in the universe. And I guess it's like this fundamental question of life. And I think the first question we have to confront, the question of suffering, and then antinatalism. Like, how do you confront the fact that there's probably, in many people's opinions, there's more suffering than there is pleasure. That pleasure, Schopenhauer said, we sort of swing like a pendulum between pain and boredom, and there's like some sweet spot where there's like a challenge, and that to me is heroism, where you're not being tortured but you're being challenged, and you're not bored, right? So that's kind of the sweet spot between hot and cold. The Norse myth of creation talks about fire and ice and how you try to get through both of those. So then, like, there has to be, I guess, to me, if you're alive and you're living and you want to choose to live and survive, then you just have to kind of affirm that absolutely and start that as your starting point, as an axiom that you're not going to question. But then you're aware of this thanatos, this deathly spirit, this antinatalism, this overthinking, you know, what Nietzsche called like that priestly spirit that seeks out the truth. You know, part of our intellectual consciousness, our rational and our reasoning drives us toward the truth. And the truth is that, you know, the areas of life that are boring and the areas of life that are painful, those regions of experience make up more of our time on earth, most likely, than the regions of ecstasy and euphoria and happiness and all of those things. And so, like, from a pure truth-based perspective, it becomes life-denying. It says, you know, we're not going to invest ourselves in life, and we're going to always be doubting and skeptical and cynical about things. And there's some kind of utility to that. So that's where I go into the tripartite class structure of saying there is a warrior life-affirming view of the world, and then there's this life-denying priestly view. And part of who we are as humans, part of what makes us different from animals, is we have that capacity for language, which allows for the development of this objectivity beyond the mere subjectivity of experience. And that means that we can have that life-denying perspective, and there's a utility to that, or at least it's part of a complex which has utility at some level, right? Language is useful for technology, but it also creates what Heidegger saw as this thanatic pressure, this death force, or the death drive, which Freud called it. And so that's a problem we have to deal with. We can't eliminate language. You can't eliminate the priest class unless we go full antinatalist. But if we're not, then we recognize that element of human nature, but we also recognize the power of the warrior in returning to that more paganistic, life-affirming side of things. But I think they both have to be understood and respected in their own place, and some kind of balance has to be found, because I think if you go fully into the warrior, you go beyond Ted Kaczynski. You realize that language is technology, and so you should just stop using language, which again you can't do and be alive, right? Humans, we need language. That kind of anarcho-mutism it becomes ridiculous. We are who we are. We're born with this seed inside of us, so we have to figure out how to let it grow without it, you know, killing itself. And so the priestly perspective has to be there. We have to accommodate that. We have to have space for that. But we also can't go so much into that we also destroy ourselves. So there's a balance between the two. And then you understand the merchant class is, in a sense, the synthesis of the life affirmation of the warrior and the abstraction of the priest. And so rather than seeking out life in itself, you seek out quantities, you seek out money, you seek out raw power, and we see that how that becomes perverted. And so really, the inverse of the merchant, in a way, like the merchant takes the life drive of the warrior and applies the abstraction of the priest. The opposite would be to take the simplicity of the warrior and what's the opposite? The priest is abstraction. And so it'd be like simplistic and life defining. That's pretty much Buddhism. And so Buddhism as a system, its amalgamation of warrior priest is the opposite of the merchant class that's come more out of the both of China as well as the Middle East. And so that's essentially urbanism, whereas Buddhism is all about getting away from the world, going to the top of the Himalayan mountains. And so that environment has produced a different kind of synthesis and opposite fusion of two different elements. So does that mean that, you know, Buddhism is the way to go? No, but it's interesting to understand these ideas to give us a reference frame for what we're doing, where we're going, analyze our own actions and ideas on a deeper level. So we have to understand where we are in this spectrum and what we're doing, how these parts fit together. And what are we going to do about all this? Well, so what is life? When we say life affirming, what does that mean? So to be life affirming for a human being means, well, sexuality is a part of that, but we have to understand the levels of sexuality. There's not just physical sex, because what is sex? Sex is the combination of bodies to create new bodies. So that would be physical sex. But what's mental sex? Mental sex would be the combination of minds to create new minds. And spiritual sex would be the combination of spirits to create new spirits. So we have to understand there's levels to this, that there's a priestly concept that you just deny sexuality. But then there's, I think, a different perspective which says that there's levels of this. And so when we become celibate, we're denying the bodily level, but that allows us to focus on the mental and the spiritual. And so being life affirming doesn't simply mean just going out and doing whatever you want, but it means understanding that sexuality in the physical form is a kind of a beginning. It's kind of the most superficial understanding. Like I talk about obesity. Obesity is a physical representation of excess and unbalance. But obesity can be spiritual. You can be spiritually obese, mentally obese, not just physically. So we have to understand those other levels, tripartite levels, and then we have to figure out where we are. Some people say R selector, K selector. We have to figure out where we are at on the spectrum, individually, collectively. And we do have to understand that if life affirmation is about sexuality, and sexuality is about multiplicities coming together to create a unity, and then a synthesis which creates a third through reproduction, creates the other, first person, second person, third person. If we understand that, then we have to ultimately be social in some ways. Now, sociality requires trust. You have to trust people in order to invest time, energy, effort, and emotional investment. And that's difficult because when that gets betrayed, it causes harm and pain, and we're harm and pain adverse, harm and pain avoidant. We want to avoid that confrontation. And so that leads to isolation. The problem with the internet and urbanism is it allows for this to happen in a really extreme sense. There's, I believe, another egret up in this tree. Let's see if it flies away. It might jump down. It might fly. Oh, there it goes. We're disturbing nature. It goes to another tree. It's fine. So yeah, you have to be social, but there's so much pressure to not be social. Now, why is that? Is that just the logical consequence of technology? But wait a second, technology is not merely a blind thing. Technology is intentional. Technology is created not through randomness, and by definition, you have to want to create something in order to have it. So technology is intentional. There's no unintentional side effects in technology. And we have to understand, like, this term conspiracy is a pigeonholing of a spectrum of the, consciousness structures, Jungian collective unconscious versus the, frontal lobe versus the rear frontal cortex, incentive structures, the way that markets work, right? So a market can incentivize things. You say like the invisible hand of the market, but that's a real force, that's a real intention. And so I'm conscious of it, and you're conscious of it, so the people at the top are conscious of it. So don't give me this nonsense about, oh, well, none of it is conscious, but at the same time, not all of it is conscious. Just because there's intentionality doesn't mean that just because, like, your school teacher is teaching you lies, doesn't mean she's conscious of those lies. But at some point up the hierarchy, someone is conscious of the lies, or some force is conscious of the lies. And so when we are isolated as individuals, we have to understand this is not accidental, it's intentional. But we have to work through it. It is a consequence of technology. We're not getting rid of language. We have to push through it to the other side. We have to get in Noah's Ark and survive this flood, which is going to wipe out 99% of people, or even more. That's just 99% is just a word to use, but it could be a much higher percent, and it could result in a totally new species. So what's the life-affirming thing to do when we're facing this mass apocalypse in front of us? Well, people have been dealing with this idea for thousands of years, And I think the thing that, I think the correct answer, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think it's to focus on intentions rather than consequences. We don't know if the world will end tomorrow. We don't know if someone's gonna hit a golf ball, it's gonna hit me in the head and I'll die. We don't know if a guy who's like partially blind is gonna drive you around in a car and get in an accident. You don't know what's gonna happen, right? The only thing you can do is have the correct intention. So yeah, if you have the correct intention, it's not that you're acting irrationally. Your intention is always to make the best decision rationally, you know, and part of that is you think about the consequences. But at the end of the day, you can't allow the potentiality for consequences to get you stuck in a loop where you're imagining infinite bad things. I remember we talked about before, boredom and pain. Those areas of life are larger than the sweet spot, the narrow path toward the good. And so if you just keep fixating on the negative, you're going to be paralyzed. You'll never be able to do the positive. And so you have to focus on your intentions rather than consequences. That's the bodega we were looking for, but it's quite occupied with like a generator, and there's a whole family. It's a pavilion. I'd like to be in a pavilion. I think we'll see. We'll go back if it doesn't work. But anyway, is this guy also, are you on your eggs as well? Are you gonna walk away, or are you gonna, yeah, you're gonna walk away. So we're herding geese, returning them to the pond. I'm providing negative feedback, negative motivation right now. Just hop in the pond, it's easy. This guy's tenacious. He refuses to be cowed. He's a free man. Or is he? No, that's a slave right there. That's a slave. He doesn't go his own way. He just he lets himself be pushed around. So yeah, so in terms of this fear that we have of social trust of other people, like, we're all gonna die. We could die today, we could die tomorrow. At the end of the day, if you live your life in a stagnant way, if you're not moving forward, if you're not having spiritual sex, if you're not progressing, if you're not building something with other people, you're basically dead. And I'm asking you to wake up, and I'm asking you to be reborn. That's what Christianity tries to do. It's become ineffective, and I become very critical of it because I feel like that religious structure has been degraded. It's been degraded because its metaphysics was flawed. Like, they were absolutely certain, like, the earth is flat and there's a firmament, and that the earth, the sun goes around the earth. And so they had these beliefs that turned out to be wrong, and they weren't able to be, like, that caused a lot of cracks and the introduction of alchemy with Rudolph II. So Christianity has really been for hundreds of years degraded and spit upon and dragged through the mud. And the people who cling to Christianity in many ways are clinging to a corpse. Now, it doesn't mean it can't be revived, but that revival is going to have to be dramatic. You know, when Christ came and he tried to revive the divine path, or whatever you want to call that, he had to smash through Judaism, you know? He had to really, like, overturn the tables and, like, do something dramatic. He didn't say, oh, this is Reformed Judaism. He said, no, this is completely new. We're not respecting the Sabbath anymore. All your dietary laws, we don't care. And so that was really dramatic. And so I think you have to have that same dramatic attitude toward Christianity. Like, I'm not going to, in some ways, yes, a cathedral is beautiful, but it's beautiful because of what it represents and because the emotional impact that it has. If a cathedral is dead, if a cathedral becomes a museum, then we should burn it down. Now, I don't advocate arson, that's a metaphor. But I'm saying that I would rather have the cathedrals burned down than to worship the corpse. You don't worship, this is one of the problems with Christianity, is the worship of Christ on the cross and his pain, right? That, to me, there's something flawed in there. Maybe something paradoxical, maybe something powerful, but at the same time, the Christ to be worshipped is the Christ who is resurrected, the Christ who is living, not the one who is dead, not the one who's dying, right? That pathos, the pathetic image of a God who is, you know, Nietzsche, God is dead, that in some ways comes from the image of Christ on the cross. not to say that these forms, the dying and rebirthing God, has to come before. The Son is a great image of the God who dies and is reborn. So I'm not saying we should reject it entirely, but I'm saying that there are nuances and there are consequences, and we have to be intentional. We have to understand. We have to go back to the ancient Greeks and understand what they were doing, but not do this kind of pagan revival thing where we simply copy what was old and try to meticulously bring up these fossils and worship a bunch of fossils. No, we learn about that stuff to help us build something new. That's what I mean when I say spiritual patricides. You have to reject the old, even if that's your father, right? At some point you have to reject your father, and that is really the loving thing to do. There's that masculine spirit that is of revolution and revolt, that you have to recognize is ultimately that new life comes through that death process, that we're going to investigate that. We're going to think about that. We're going to consider the possibility that the best way to honor your father is to kill your father. Not physically, but in a spiritual sense, genealogically. That's really the best way to carry it on and continue it. And of course, Luke, I almost said Luke Skywalker. Isn't his name Luke the director? You know what I'm talking about, not Harrison Ford. Whoever made Star Wars. George Lucas, whatever. Brain freeze moment. George Lucas integrates this into Star Wars, where in order for Luke to honor his father Anakin, he has to kill his father. And that's what his father really wants. The father wants the son to surpass him, and in that way, it's kind of a murder, right? Spiritually speaking. So we have to be open to this idea of putting new wine in new wineskins, as opposed to, and wine represents the spirit, and the wineskin represents the brand and the words and the semantics. We have to be willing to play with semantics. When people say to me oh, you're not deep left, you're a secret, you're just playing a word game. It's no, words are magical and they open up new doorways. And if you're autistic about it, then you're basically closing yourself off and shutting yourself in a coffin. And I don't want to do that. I want new life, new possibilities, new relationships. And yes, I'm extreme on that end. Of course, there's a space for the old and the traditional and the stable and the Amish. I respect that. But we have a lot of that going on and people stuck in their ways. I'm trying to unstuck people. I'm trying to unlock people's potential that I think has been trapped in this coffin, this mental prison. We have to kind of blow down the doors, kind of blow up the walls, and we have to let those people free. Now, at some point, you leave the prison and you want to go back into your house. And someone was telling me about the Indo-European war bands, of how young men would go out like the Spartans, and they get wild and crazy, and then they would go back, to society and reintegrate. So that process, it can happen, it's legitimate, and I believe in it. And let's point it up to the sky here, so that we respect all the guidelines, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so I'm trying to unlock these things and new potential, and people want to be critical rather than constructive. People want to tell me, and they believe they have a good intention, but we have to really dig deep into our attention. What are we doing, and why are we doing it? When we say things like you should do this and you should do that on your YouTube channel. Okay, if you've had an idea of how to improve it, instead of going up to me and saying you should do this and you should do that, you should say, how can I help? Instead of saying you should go here and you should buy this, it's could I buy you this? Could I help you go here? In our intention, are we simply passive observers throwing out commands from an armchair generals? Or are we saying, how can I help? How can I contribute? And most people are locked in this prison of, oh, I can't help, I can't contribute. They just define their situation. They create an identity. I am not a helpful person. I'm a burden. I'm useless. And that defines them. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Instead of saying that, you say, my identity is as a, something positive, whether it's I'm a creator, I'm a constructor, I'm the giver of life, I am a communicator, I'm someone who binds people together, I'm someone who breathes new life. You have to define yourself in this way. And again, it seems people have a resistance to this kind of positivity because it feels fake, because life-denying attitudes seem safer, right? If we just deny life like the Buddhists, then we won't suffer. That's true. If you deny life, you'll have less suffering because you won't expose yourself to the vulnerability of pain. You'll let down your walls, and your flesh is going to be soft and gooey, and it's going to hurt like a baby cries when it's born. But we need to be able to do that. We need to be able to try that. And obviously we're going to fail more than we're going to succeed. In any venture, anything that you do in life, if you really try, like, you're going to succeed more than you fail. Oh, there's some baby geese over here. That is true. And so we have to almost want to fail, right? And that's what I mean. That's what I mean when I say intentions over consequences. Because if you fail and you beat yourself up over it, you're going to create suffering that's unnecessary. If you go up to someone and you say, I'm on a road trip, and people ignore you for 3 months, they don't look at your videos, they're watching the first 30 seconds, or people promise in February to host you months later, and you say, I'm a week away from your place, and then they cancel without a reason, get mad at you for asking for an explanation or to reschedule. And so if you allow these things, look at these baby geese, this beautiful little, I'm not going to harass them because they'll fight me. They'll definitely fight me. That's love the geese have for each other. It makes you want to cuddle with them, but you can't do that. You have to restrain yourself. But so you can allow rejection, you can dwell on it and reflect on it and kind of stew in this rejection, and you can make it hurt you, or you can say, you know what? My job is to act and to do and to contribute and to help, and if I do that, then I have done my job, I've done my duty, and I'm happy, no matter the consequences. If I say hello, I say, hey, how's it going? How you doing today? And they give me a bad look, or they say, you're a weirdo, you're a creep, why are you looking at me? Why are you staring at me? Why are you talking to me? Why are you giving me compliments? And if I allow that negative reaction to define me, if I say the consequence of my action is what's mattering, then I'm a slave. I allow the world to control me, because all someone has to do is say a negative word and it destroys my day. But if I say what matters is my intention and what I put out into the world rather than what it gives back to me, if I say what matters is my intention, then it doesn't matter if they respond positively or negatively. But what you will find is if you're tenacious and you keep doing this, is someone somewhere will respond positively. I've been making videos for a while, and I've been trying to construct things, and I've watched people try to tear them down and be skeptical and question me and say that I'm too arrogant and I don't know what I'm talking about and I need to be open-minded to destructive ideas. And I pretty much will talk to anyone in private, and it's a criticism that I will take reasonably. I will take the criticism reasonably in the sense I'm not going to beat myself up over anytime someone insults me. I'm not going to allow that to penetrate my heart. But I'm going to consider, I'm going to say, okay, well, is there a way that I could be more tolerant? Is there a way I could be more open-minded? And I'll consider that. I won't just completely dismiss it. But I've been putting out these things, and what has been the result? I have a small channel. We're trying to put things together. People can look at it and they can say, like, what are we doing here? Where are we headed? People keep asking me, what's the goal? Really what they're asking is, what's the consequence? And what I'm telling you is, goals are great and good consequences are awesome, but if that's not balanced out with a focus on your intent, then that becomes exhausting because you're just living life and nothing's happening. Like, where is that? We want to win an election. We want $1 billion. We want our own country. We want this. We want that. And if all you're doing is you're focused on the consequences, and those things aren't going to happen in a day, what is to sustain you for years or decades or centuries? It has to be your intention. It has to say that my intention in itself is good regardless of the consequences. And if you're tenacious, the world belongs to those who are tenacious. If you simply never give up and you keep trying, and when you try something it fails and you try something new and you say, okay, well, yeah, I failed, but I'm not going to spend more than 30 seconds dwelling. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to self-pity. I'm not going to go to everyone and say, oh, I'm such a bad person. I'm a failure. And you don't dwell in that because you recognize it's a sin. It's a sin against life. And it's a sin against your fellow man who needs your help. You know, you may feel in yourself like, what's my purpose of living? Because internally, all you can do is kind of quote unquote help yourself. It's like, so what if I have a good body? So what if I'm smart? So what if I have money? If it's not dedicated to something outside of myself? And that becomes very destructive. And you saw with Connor Murphy how he built himself up 2.8 million subscribers, and he realized after, you know, with some assistance from outside substances, which I don't recommend because I think there's a philosophical way to arrive at the conclusions in a safer way. I think he's now in a really bad place. But I would say that you will realize eventually that if you build up yourself and it's not for a higher purpose of helping others, it's completely useless and will leave you feeling empty. So let's start other focused. Let's try to build each other up. Let's have good intentions, and the consequences will follow as long as we don't give up. And as long as we're willing to try new things. Like if you're focused, you're like, no, we have to be right-wingers. Well, then you've just said that being right-wing is more important to you than winning. And if you said, well, no, but we have to be Christians, well, then you said Christianity is more important than winning. And maybe it is. Maybe that's what you believe, and that's fine. But we should be honest about that. We should acknowledge that if you're holding these ideologies or religions or whatever above winning and they're not working, we have to be willing to let those things die. Let the dead bury the dead and try something new. That's what I'm trying to do. And I believe that it is working and will continue to work so long as I am persistent. The moment that I give up, the moment that I allow fear to come in, because fear is the origin. I had someone say to me, he said, I have a problem. And I said, well, let's work on it. Let's create a 3-year plan. Let's work on it. And this guy was so helpful to me in helping me understand the basics of what it means to live a good life, because he had such an issue that I was like, okay, we actually have to come to the truth, because if we're not using the truth, if we're using any falsehoods here, it's not going to work. We have to really use the truth. And so he's saying I have a problem, and I say, well, we're going to work for the next 3 years on a solution. And he says, but what if that doesn't work in 3 years? What if it doesn't work in 10 years? I say, this is what life is about. Life is about working, struggling, fighting, that hero's journey for your whole life. When you die, that's when you stop worrying about it. But until you're dead, you have to keep trying. You have to keep fighting. And if you reach a brick wall, you have to allow yourself to redefine the parameters of success. Because if you're stuck, that means don't hit your head against the wall. Don't beat yourself up for being a failure. Redefine the terms of success. You know, there's also problems with this, like the body positivity movement. There's a golden mean where you're persistent in trying to improve yourself, but you're also, you're not allowing yourself to get stuck in dead ways of living. So he said to me, but don't I have to worry that eventually, like if it doesn't work, like I'll have to give up? It's like, no, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to live in fear. You don't have that obligation. And the spirit behind that is the fear that if I put my 100% into this life, that I will be disappointed, that I will find out that I wasn't good enough. Whereas if you never try, you'd be like, well, I could get a degree if I tried. I could have a good body if I tried. I could have a good girlfriend if I tried. I could have a good job if I tried. But I know if I try, I will probably fail. I'll probably have a breakup. I'll probably get fired. I'll probably fail a class. And that to me is so scary. The pain of that's so scary. I'd rather not try and have this secret fantasy in my head of like, well, if I wanted to, I could. And that's about identity. That's about saying I'm a secret winner. I'm a winner, but it's a secret because I'm not actually going to test that theory. I'm just going to walk around and feel this arrogance and pride of like, well, if I tried, yeah, I could do something, but I'm not going to risk it. Like, there's nothing worth risking it for. No, this is the only thing. We don't have anything else. This is all that we have. So when you talk about risk, you have to put it in that perspective of there's 100% chance of failure. You will fail, you will die, but we're going to try anyway for some higher purpose that goes to the others through the triad, dyad, monad, whatever paradox. Some people call it lies. Some people say this is metaphysical mumbo jumbo and you just need to believe science or be a fundamentalist Christian or just accept some dogma. People want me to create a dogma for them. And then other people say I'm too dogmatic. But the thing is, you'll never satisfy everyone. You have to specialize and learn what is it that you're good at, what is it you want to do. Those things are the same thing at the end of the day. It's, passion, impact, all of those things. You're going to find that only through trial and error. Am I good at playing this sport? Well, I won't know until I tried, and trying it involves failing and getting beaten. But that's the only path, that's the only way. So we're trying, and we're trying to create a dogma. And it's difficult because, as I've said, launching onto a label, the power of words, the meme magic, the symbols, the archetypes, the person, all of the ideas behind Trump existed before Trump. And the same for any other, Biden, Bernie, whoever, Hillary, doesn't matter, Tulsi, Buttigieg. But the ideas behind all these people already existed. They were just coalesced into a figurehead. That's what a word is. A word is like a personality. It's like a person. It has its own characterization, and it is like literally it is a being in itself. And so to find and discover that a word like paganism, a word like Christianity, that's very powerful. That's what I've tried to do with Deep Left. That's what I've tried to do with minoritarianism. Maybe those aren't the best words. I need help with this. I want people to not just break down those words and say, that sounds silly, that's a stupid word. Give me a better word. And don't just give me some old word, we should be. There's a lot of stupid words out there. Neo-absolutism, very cringe-inducing. So, but we have to keep trying. We need to say, we're trying to find a religion. We need to come up with a word for that religion. And there's a top-down and a bottom-up, kind of like inductive versus deductive reasoning, where you can actually learn about your religion simply from the word, simply by imagining it as a holistic system and then deriving its principles and dogmas. I think that's really how Christianity started, is in the person of Christ, and then later you got the dogma. But there's the opposite way, say like this dogma is good, that dogma is good, that dogma is good, then we'll give it a label. I think you can come at it from both ends. But the experimental going back and forth, that push and pull, is really, we're trying to wiggle a very heavy object here. We're trying to take something that is really difficult. It is like the seed which is hibernating in the soil during winter. We're living in winter time. We have to be assured that all of our effort in planting the seed in the winter will come to fruition in the spring and summer and fall. And it will explode quicker than we can imagine. But right now, there's not going to be any reward for doing this work. It's not glamorous. It's not going to provide you a lot of dopamine, but it is the right thing to do, to really take the time and effort to go forth on this. And I haven't been the most patient person. This is a self-criticism. I haven't done the work the way that I should. It's more fun to make a video than to go read a book. But we need to have both. We need to have people who communicate and motivate and inspire, and then we have to have people who are willing to delve into a text and research. And these people have to communicate. The people who are more social and the people who are more objective and systems oriented, they need to be in a union, in a spiritual marriage with each other, and they need to be able to give and take to each other and receive value from each other to create that new spiritual child. And what happens is the systems-oriented people isolate, and they build analysis on analysis. They never check it out with the intuitive social people, and they create a bunch of political theory which is nonsense.